Is it quite possible that 80% of a tennis lesson is wasted? Welcome, as always, to mytenniscoaching.com and My Tennis Coaching on YouTube. And that's a question I'm asking today. Is 80% of your tennis lesson absolutely wasted? And my thinking of this is watching a couple of what we maybe class as hit and giggle or recreational coaching sessions recently. And the amount of time where tennis is not played is quite staggering. And to be honest, when I used to work, especially with that sort of demographic, with your recreational, your once a weekers, your hit and gigglers, my lesson was pretty much the same. So this is no attack on the coaches, or it's nothing that I've not done in the past. But let's just think about it. So warm up, generally a physical warm up. Sometimes it's laps, which one is not good, or it might be some type of team game. Okay, so there's no tennis involved in the warm up, so there's no tennis skills developed in the warm up, and we'll get on to the argument of agility, balance, coordination, speed a little bit later on. Then we'll do body and ball, or ABCs. Okay, so you're throwing, you're catching, you're jumping, you're skipping, your physical literacy development. Again, no tennis skills taking part. And if I think back to my under 8 sessions, my red sessions, a vast majority of my sessions were throwing and catching. Because the mindset was, if they can't hit, we've got to teach them how to throw and catch first. And you'll see it in lots of beginner, entry-level grassroots groups where, you might have 2 players throwing, maybe 1 player throwing, 1 hitting. And again, the mindset is, they're not going to. So they're not good enough to play tennis, so we'll get them to throw and catch as well. So tennis involved there, minimal. And again, we'll look at in a minute why throwing possibly isn't the best route to go for looking to develop tennis players. Then we might have some racket and ball. Again, racket and ball, more often than not, isolated practice. With the mindset, again, these are beginners. These are once a weekers. They can't rally, especially in a full open court. So we might have 1 feeder, 1 hitter, but very little. It's basically isolation, basically hand feeding. And if coaches aren't lining the players up and feeding each individual player, they might be getting the players to feed each other. Okay, so there's a little bit of tennis in there. How much tennis skills developed, again, we'll get onto that in a few minutes. Then we might have racket and ball, or the racket stage, and we might have a little bit of rallying at this point. So a little bit of rallying. Okay, so now we have a little bit of tennis, maybe a bit more dynamic games, a bit more open practice, and then we might finish off with some serving. And generally speaking, serving in isolation. So serving into an empty service box. And that's a standard lesson. That's a lesson that I've done many, many times. But how much tennis is being developed in that session? I would argue probably less than 20%. And I get the logic of it. So let's go back to the start of the session, to throwing and catching. I've just released a podcast today and an article on the racket business on why catching isn't really a good start for a beginner player. Catching and hitting are 2 different skills. Catching, I believe, in my opinion, is a more difficult skill because you have to intercept the ball and stop it in the flight. And you've got to stop it and wrap your hand around the ball with your fingers. And that takes quite fine motor skills, quite a high level of dexterity. Hitting, on the other hand, is a different skill. Hitting, I'm deflecting or redirecting the ball. I don't have to stop it. I just really have to generate some force with my racket and try and redirect it. I believe that's an easier skill. And by getting the kids to throw and catch, we believe, again, this mindset of, if they can throw and catch first, we can then upskill them and develop the hitting skill on top. Doesn't work that way because it's 2 separate skills. And I go into more detail on this in the podcast. So if you are interested, head over to Spotify, search My Tennis Coaching Podcast and listen to that. I'll leave the show link down below as well. So catching's a different skill. So therefore, we're spending 20-30 minutes of a lesson throwing and catching. And it doesn't translate. It doesn't transfer into hitting skills. They're 2 separate skills. So the vast majority of the session so far, from the warm-up point of view, we're practicing skills that we don't need for tennis. We're not practicing tennis skills. Yes, we're developing physical literacy. Yes, we're developing problem-solving, decision-making. but we're doing it outside the context of tennis. And that's all great for child development. Absolutely. I'm not knocking that whatsoever. I think it's great for physical literacy development, especially now where kids aren't getting enough physical literacy. But if these kids are coming to tennis once a week, my argument is, and this is what maybe answering the questions, why are we spending so much time developing skills that aren't used in tennis? Surely we should be using the very limited time we have with these players, 1 hour a week, if that, maybe 45 minutes. Why aren't we using that time to play tennis? Again, the mindset of we need to develop the physical skills first and then we'll teach the tennis skills later is completely crazy to me. And again, I've done it. Why don't we just teach the tennis skills from day one? And yes, the argument is, but Steve, they can't rally. They can't hit the ball over the net. Fine, I understand that because that's challenging. But they can possibly rally on the floor. They can possibly have a modified environment or game or task of tennis. It doesn't have to be playing over the net. That's where the coaching skill comes in. But for me, unless it involves 2 rackets and a receiving and sending element, it's not tennis. I'm not developing tennis skill. And how many times have you done a lesson where a child says to you, when can we play tennis? And I've pushed back on the kid and said, oh, well, yeah, we need to learn these skills first. Learn these skills and then tennis will be a bit easier later on. Well, the kid's not interested in that. The kid wants to play tennis. And the parents as well, oh, there's too much time throwing and catching. We want to see them play tennis. And I agree with them now. They're not playing tennis. They're not developing tennis skills. They're developing physical literacy skills, which again are important, but they're not tennis skills and they don't transfer very well because it's a different type of skill. Catching and hitting are 2 separate skills. Again, please check out the podcast if you want me to go in a bit more detail on that. And then we got like serving and isolation. A great debate on Instagram yesterday when I put the post up about you shouldn't practice your serve on your own. Oh yeah, but we need to do it to set it in stone, muscle memory. We need to do it for confidence. We need to do it without pressure. But when you introduce a returner or a score, it all falls apart because again, it's a separate type of skill. You'll get really good at serving in isolation without pressure, without context. When you apply more variability, more pressure, more decision making, more information from a perception point of view, it becomes a different skill. So again, I just can't get my head around the thinking of the best way to practice and get better at tennis is to strip away everything that makes tennis challenging. Practice it in isolation. Get the basics right, the fundamentals, linking to my post yesterday on Monotoglu, and then we'll reintroduce all the chaos. But why don't we just teach them in the chaos? Why don't we just teach them to serve with a returner? Why don't we just teach them to serve with a scoring system? Why are we taking them out of tennis and then trying to put them back in? And then we wonder why it doesn't work. And I got called extreme on Instagram yesterday. Oh, you're too extreme. What's more extreme? Me promoting the fact that we should teach tennis within the context of tennis. We should just play tennis. Or taking the player out of tennis, teaching him in a way that looks nothing like tennis, and then putting them back in. The question I'm asking you now is, what's more extreme? Coaching tennis within the context of tennis, or coaching tennis outside the context of tennis, with the mindset and the fake belief that we need to develop these important basic skills first before we teach tennis skills. Why can't we just teach tennis skills first? It just blows my mind. So how much of tennis lessons are wasted? Is it 80%? Is it even more? Let me know in the comments. And then I think for the other point of view, like these are once a weekers. These are probably not going to be your competitive and performance players. So anyone who's going to fire back, yeah, strength and conditioning, stuff like that. No, these are once a weekers. And we wonder why so many kids drop out of tennis. Because we're not teaching them tennis. And then when they do play tennis, they haven't got the skills. They haven't got the tools. Therefore, they go and find something else. And it goes back to this mass belief of what coaching is. Again, I got into a great conversation this week. I think if you've got a once a week hit and giggle recreational squad, the most important thing is the kids have fun. They play tennis. That's what they've come for. They want to play tennis. Let them play tennis. You've got to modify what version of tennis they play and let them fall in love with tennis. Again, we try and teach these kids these skills that, one, they don't need, and two, they don't transfer into the game anyway. And it's just so backwards. So, let me know, as always, in the comments. Check out mytenniscoaching.com. Watch the video on the screen now. And until next time, I'll speak to you soon.